Baby boomers, here's your chance to relive the 60s and wallow in nostalgia. For everyone else, it's an opportunity to see what all the fuss was about. Next weekend marks the 40th anniversary of Woodstock, the rock festival that tried to change the world. And in some ways it did. 500,000 people descended on a cow paddock in upstate New York for 3 days of peace, love and protest. Naturally, the oldies were outraged. And just as naturally, Woodstock became a lasting symbol of the 60s revolution. And I'm pleased to report that even today, the spirit of Woodstock still beats in the hearts of many an old Woodstock became the defining cultural moment of the 1960s.
Freedom, 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 freedom.
With the Vietnam War dividing America, 500,000 people gathered in the countryside in some kind of hippie utopia.
You realize that you're not the only people in your city who are doing the things you are, but they're everywhere. We're taking over.
And the soundtrack was provided by possibly the greatest musical lineup ever assembled.
He's a drugstore truck driving man. He's the head of the Ku Klux Klan. Take a load off, Benny. And you put the load right on me.
What started out as a little folk music festival ended up rocking the world.
People try to put us down, just because we.
Woodstock is an icon. It's a window into a whole nother reality. Okay, up until that time it was black and white, conservative, fear, oppression, alienation. All of a sudden, a window opened, and it was freedom and life and love and color and beauty and hope for the first time. So yeah, it was a cataclysmic event.
It looks like we're going to get a little bit of rain, so you better cover up. All right, everybody just sit down, wrap yourself up.
If you were on this spot 40 years ago, you'd have scored the best patch of mud in the house because you were right in front of that enormous stage. There were 500,000 people right behind you, and everybody's high, whether it's the drugs, the free love, or the music. Now, they certainly knew then that it was one incredible gig. What they couldn't have known at the time, though, is that they were making history.
Hey, if you think really hard, maybe we can stop this rain.
I guess if I had a dream, it was what we got, only what we got was my dream on steroids.
Producer Michael Lang was the brains behind Woodstock.
What does it cost to put one of these things together? You know?
$250,000.
At the time, he was just a kid with a big idea. Barely out of college, he somehow raised the money, organised the venue, and signed the biggest names in music.
This is an early booking sheet where we laid out the days and who was going to play and what we were paying them.
Janis Joplin, Blood, Sweat and Tears, Iron Butterfly, Joe Cocker, Crosby, Stills and Nash, The Who. Just incredible list, isn't it?
Yeah.
It brings a smile to your face now, looking back on it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What would you do if I sang out of tune? Will you stand up and walk out on me?
You were a 24-year-old young guy at the time.
I was.
How did you pull that off?
God knows. I was too stupid to know any different. I was too stupid to know I couldn't.
160,000 tickets were sold, which would have made it the biggest concert ever. But word quickly spread, and 500,000 people showed up.
It was a mecca, man. It was people headed in all the same direction. It was almost as if it was like the gathering of the tribes, you know?
Duke Devlin was a young man living in Texas when he says he was summoned to Woodstock. He was one of the lucky ones. More than 1 million people never made it because the traffic was so chaotic.
It was just a gridlock here, Michael, you know, a gridlock. You couldn't move. You couldn't move either way. People abandoned their cars right in the middle of the road. And that's the way it was, you know?
Also stuck in the traffic jam was a young man on a motorbike called Patrick Colucci. He was training to be a priest, but he'd left the seminary to see what Woodstock was all about. On the road, he hooked up with a 17-year-old girl called Maria and offered her a ride.
I'm just sitting there, and Maria walks out of the car, walks up to me. She didn't have any shoes on. She had jeans, and she had long hair then, and quite impressive, I gotta add.
He asked me, do you want to see what's up ahead? Do you want to get on the bike? I remember that. So I said, well, okay.
And we went up and down that road, and I said, you know what? I think I'm gonna be with this girl. All right, sweetheart, let me put this on for you.
All right, now be careful, don't mess up my hair.
I won't.
40 years later, and Patrick and Maria are still together.
My legs aren't that long.
He never did become a priest. Instead, they married and had 2 children.
Hold on tight now.
All thanks to that incredible weekend at Woodstock.
I'll paint rainbows all over your blue.
So when you're standing there on top of that hill with all those people and the beautiful girl, what are you saying to the big guy upstairs?
Thanks, God. I get the message now.
Woodstock was a cosmic collision between God and man, and the fallout is still here, you know?
Duke Devlin also developed a lasting relationship at Woodstock with the place itself.
It's gorgeous. I love it. It's humble, but it's home, buddy.
You never left.
No. Is it over yet?
It's still going, right? Duke is the hippie that came to Woodstock and never went home. 40 years after the party ended, he's still here, working as a tour guide. He's a living monument to all that happened that weekend.
It's like I can smell it, I can taste it, I can feel it, you know? And then when that happens, I try to jump into it to get more, and then it's gone.
So, in the quiet times around here now, you don't run down and take a skinny dip?
We don't call it skinny dipping anymore either, we call it chunky dunking.
I swear I've seen.
About a year ago, I wouldn't have believed that this is the way to swim, but this is the way to swim.
For years, hippies and freaks had existed on society's fringe, but the sheer size of Woodstock and its powerful message of peace brought the so-called counterculture into full public view.
And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam.
Country Joe McDonald, a popular folk artist of the time, was leading the protest.
Listen, people, I don't know how you expect to ever stop the war if you can't sing any better than that. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for?
You had to know that it was really pissing off the establishment. It was what are we fighting for? You know, I'm going to do my job, but you're nuts. You're completely crazy for sending me off to do this thing, you know.
Country Joe was well qualified to comment on Vietnam. He'd served in the military for a number of years before being honourably discharged.
And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up pearly gates. Yeah, there ain't no time to wonder why we're all gonna die.
He's now 67, but still holds the passion and anger that stirred the masses at Woodstock.
I happen to hate Richard Nixon. I was think to myself, Well, if he was in the in the Oval Office one day, they had to find out, what's going on up there. Well, there's 500,000 kids up there. Well, what are they doing? So they actually, they just said, "Fuck you, Mr. President," and they sang the song about not wanting to go to Vietnam.
Truth is, you didn't need to be a protester or a hippie to go to Woodstock. There were plenty of locals at the event, including nurse Barbara Hahn.
We were in the office and the phone rang.
What was the call?
The call was that they needed first aiders to go and administer first aid at Woodstock.
We need a doctor or a medic, please, over on stage left.
The heady weekend was taking its toll. Hundreds of festival goers were suffering the ill effects of the drugs they'd taken. In particular, a bad batch of LSD, known as the brown acid.
When I got into Woodstock, I really felt like a nun going into a brothel.
A nun going into a brothel. It was that extreme.
It was. At one point during the course of the afternoon, I said, "Do you mean to tell me that everyone in this room is tripping?" And someone said, "Yes, ma'am, and it can be a beautiful thing."
"40 years on, the question must be asked, what does Woodstock mean now? America's still fighting unpopular wars, and many of the Woodstock generation traded their ideals for consumerism and corporate greed.
We thought that Woodstock was the beginning of an era, but actually it was the end of an era. Of course I'm disappointed that's not the type of world we live in today, but that doesn't mean, like they say, give peace a chance, Let's give it another chance.
Whoa, you got a tip of it.
For Pat and Maria, now grandparents, the legacy of Woodstock is much easier to identify.
Whoa!
She is the love of my life. I really love her more than anything else in the world. You're welcome.
Your turn, Maria.
I love him too. He knows that.
Show me. Feels the same as it did 40 years ago.
You agree?
Except for, aching bones and stuff.
They say you had to be there. And for someone of my generation, listening to the stories of these Woodstock veterans may be as close as I'll ever get. But take a walk out here, and you may just catch an echo of the music or feel the love that filled this field 40 years ago. You can stand here, but to hear your story, have you tell it. I can feel it.
Thanks, Michael. And I can feel, I talk to a lot of people, and you're one of those, you have the spirit, man. It's genuine, it's real. I can feel it. I can feel it too. It's good.
Hello, I'm Amelia Adams. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for our brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our extra minute segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.